Okay, welcome back to another Enneagram in a Movie video. So, for those of you who are fans of the Enneagram in a Movie podcast that TJ and I did with TJ Ingracia, and prior to them with Maria Jose and Tamer, we're extending this into video. So, if you have not listened to the Enneagram in a Movie podcast, we encourage you to go back and do so. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts. So, I'm Mario Sikora, and with me is TJ Dawe, and we are going to talk about one of my all-time favorite movies, Get Shorty, and the navigating instinctual bias. So, TJ, first of all, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. So, you've only recently seen Get Shorty for the first time. Is that true?
Yes, I was aware of it when it came out in the theaters in the 90s. For whatever reason, didn't see it, didn't have an aversion to seeing it, just didn't
Yeah,
see it until like a couple months ago.
yeah, yeah. So I feel bad going back and talking about old movies. I get criticized a lot for talking about old movies. Haven't you seen anything, in the last 5 years? And honestly, I haven't seen that much in the last 5 years, and I don't find that much in the last 5 years worth talking about, quite frankly. There's some things, but I love this movie, and I think that one of except for a number of kind of art-ish sort of movies, most movies are superhero movies or action movies or something like that. Not great story movies anymore. This movie gets Shorty, I think, what we used to think of as adult what we could have thought of as adult entertainment, right? And I don't mean porn movies in that case, right? I'm talking about
Grown up.
movies, yeah, grown-ups, movies for grown-ups. So I don't know. Talk to me about that, TJ. Is that the way you see this movie?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's not based on a franchise. There's no special effects. Um, there's a little bit of violence and action, but it's not an action movie at all.
Right,
Like it's crime fiction, but it's there's no car chases.
right,
It doesn't climax with a shootout or anything like that. It's a
right.
very clever and very subtle movie, and it's predicated on, I think, more than anything else, the writing and the performances of the actors.
Yeah. And that it is really in that sense. First of all, it's a very, very well written movie. I don't know who did the screen adaptation, but it's based on a book by one of my all-time favorite authors, Elmore Leonard, and we can touch on some of his other books that were adapted into movies as we go. But I think this is one of the strongest adaptations of his work. I would put Out of Sight and Jackie Brown up there as kind of the cream of the crop of Elmore Leonard adaptations. But in addition to being good writing, excellent directing too by Barry Sonnenfeld before he started to get sort of overwhelmed by his own quirkiness. I think was very excellent, and the acting is spectacular. It has an amazing cast, right? Dennis Farina, Rene Russo, Danny DeVito, Delroy Lindo, Gene Hackman, and of course John Travolta at the kind of the heart of the movie. TJ, why don't you give a quick summary of the movie Get Shorty in case there are other people who haven't seen it
Yeah, so
recently
Get
or
Shorty tells the story of Chili Palmer, who is a loan shark based in Miami. And in pursuing an errant debtor, he winds up in LA, where he stumbles into the film industry and is chasing a debt owed by a kind of a small time B movie film producer played by Gene Hackman. And then while there, winds up pitching him an idea for a movie based on his own life, his own experience, and then finds himself taking footsteps into the world of movie making. And in the meantime, the world of crime kind of follows him there. He just doesn't make a clean break and leave it behind. He is still a loan shark. He's still looking to collect the debt. And there are people above him who want the money that he's trying to get. So all of these things collide. It's the crime world kind of intersecting with the movie world.
yeah. Tell me why we picked this as a navigating movie.
Well, let me throw that back to you. Can you
Yeah.
explain to the viewer or listener what you mean by navigate?
Yeah, so the navigating instinctual bias is, one of the three instinctual biases, right? Some people call them instincts, some people refer to them as subtypes, but it's this focus of attention, and other people call it the social subtype or the social instinct. But I see it as more having to do with navigating the social environment, right? The word social kind of implies outgoing, right? It kind of implies wanting to be part of a group and wanting to be, involved with the group and that sort of thing. And that's not really what most navigators' experiences are. They might want to be part of a group, but more they want to understand what's happening in the group around them, right? So they're trying to figure out what's happening here, who's who can I trust, who can I trust, who can I make a deal with, who can I make a deal with. So it's all these things that are all about the social contract of engaging with people. Okay. And I think that a lot of that is at the heart of this movie, right?
I would say at its core, this is a fish out of water story. You've got a guy who's not from the film world, not from entertainment at all, and he's also not from LA at all. So he's very much, I don't think they established, like, was he born and raised in Miami, but he's definitely based there. And those are his connections. His office is in the back of a barber shop. He works for a mobster who's based in Brooklyn, but there's local mobsters in Miami that he's subordinate to or connected to. So he leaves all of that to come to LA, where the rules are very different. And as you being a navigating type, I would ask if you agree with this. Fish out of water stories are almost always about navigating.
Yeah, so there's fish, yes, and so what happens with the navigating domain, and we've talked about this in another video, is that when we are in a situation that is novel to us, when we find ourselves in a new social environment, it brings out the navigating in us. Okay. And, and I've used the example before of somebody moving to a new school and having to figure out how does this operate. Mean Girls is the example I've used, right? So classic fish out of water. I've come from being I don't know, I think she was like, her parents were not missionaries, but doing something in Africa or something, or, and then coming to, a city kind of school. So absolutely. So this is about a character trying to figure out, okay, the Chili Palmer, John Travolta character is, he's longing for something more, right? This is how the movie opens, with him kind of looking out the window onto Miami and thinking, there's more out there and I want to go see what it is. And so eventually this opportunity comes up for him to go do that, right? He goes to collect this debt to Las Vegas, and then they send him to go collect the debt from LA, and he finds himself there, and he's always been a film buff, right? So he even wanted to open, that starts off with him, the movie starts off with him talking about his disappointment at a movie theater closing and how, he should buy it and show repertory films and all that sort of stuff. And so when he finds himself in LA, he gets excited by, hey, this is the world I've always dreamed about, right? This is how I've, wanted to, live. How do I figure out how to make this happen, right? What are the connections I need to make? What are the relationships I need to build in order to be able to thrive in this environment I want to? The other thing I noticed as I was rewatching this movie, it's a movie I've seen a bunch of times. I saw it in the movie theater. It's one of those rewatchables that if it's on TV, I'll watch it, right? Because every scene has something fun and interesting in it. But it's a movie about navigating with hardly any navigators in it, kind of like Goodfellas, and most of the characters not being that good at navigating, right? And even with the Chili Palmer character, because it was an Elmore Leonard book, the character is written as a navigator. I think almost all the main characters in Elmore Leonard books are navigators. Okay. But John Travolta is so freaking transmitting that it's hard to put a blanket on that. Right. So I'm curious about your perspective on the Chili Palmer character. That one.
Exactly the same thing. And just to fill in anybody for whom the term transmitting is unfamiliar, transmitting is the inclination to make my mark,
Yeah.
to put a dent in the universe, to stamp on the air itself, like, I was here, this is what I'm all about. What do you think? It's fanning my peacock tail, it's leaving a legacy, it's all of these things. And something that performers, a lot of actors are transmitters, a lot of singers are transmitters. Like, it's
Yeah.
much easier to see in the world of music because somebody like James Brown or
Mm.
Prince or Lady Gaga or David Bowie or
Right.
Elton John. Like they fan their peacock tail. Like that
Right.
is what
Right.
they're most known for. And that's how they built their career, on doing
Right.
exactly that. Actors, it's a little bit different because you're playing roles
Right.
that somebody else wrote and you're costumed by somebody else. And as you said, in this case, the character is a navigator. But John Travolta, like from his first major role in Saturday Night Fever, is all about like bubbing. Hey,
Yes.
folks, this is me.
Yes.
Take a look at what I got going on.
Yes.
And as you said, like that cannot be contained.
Right. Right. So
So
I
he's
think,
just got this magnetism to him,
yeah.
even when he's not doing anything. You
Right.
just find yourself just like, look at that guy.
Right. Yeah.
Like even when he's not like costumed to look incredibly good looking or flattering,
Right.
when he's not like turning it on for somebody, he can't not
Right.
transmit
Right.
his amazingness.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Even his walk, right? I mean, the way he just kind of struts through life and, all of these things, it's not the way navigators walk. Okay? But it's navigating challenges that he's focusing on. And he does a lot of navigating. So I would say that even if we were to, make the case that Chili Palmer is a transmitter, as a character, he's doing a whole lot of navigating there. And usually transmitters aren't that great at navigating, but he's good at listening. Right? He's good at asking questions. He's good at paying attention. Although it is interesting, there's that scene where they're watching, he's in the theater watching A Touch of Evil. Okay. And he's sitting by himself and he's leaning forward, okay, in his, and leaning on the seat in front of him. And at the end of the movie, he reaches up and he taps that guy on the shoulder, right? And and kind of points to the screen. Like he just has to share his, enthusiasm for the movie with this complete stranger. And the guy kind of looks at him like he's crazy, right? But so even in that, even though there's a whole lot of transmitting going, I'm sorry, navigating going on, the transmitting still oozes out, right? Kind of
Right.
leaks out. Right? I would suggest that the only true navigating character in the movie is the Rene Russo character, right? Um, Tell me your thoughts on her.
I agree. Like she plays an actor who's kind of doomed to the world of B movies. She wants something more, but that's just where she is. She's doing a lot more assessing,
Right.
just a lot more of like who's who. And she doesn't fall under Chili's magnetic spell immediately.
Right.
But he is able to put it on her eventually because he knows her body of work. And that is the way to get to the heart of anybody in Hollywood, but certainly any transmitter is like,
Right.
oh, I know about you. I know this, this, this. It's like, oh, you know about me? That's great.
Right.
But yeah, she's very much like, who is this person?
Yes.
And what's going on? And how do we all fit in?
There's also an element of her dismissiveness toward some of the more transmitting characters, right? Her almost disdain for even the ones that she likes, right? And this is something we see in navigators. They can so what happens in these instinctual biases, there's a particular pattern of expression or a relationship that we each have with each of the domains. Okay, so for navigators, we call that the zone of enthusiasm. The zone of enthusiasm. That's what they enjoy. It's what they spend their time doing. It's where their interests go. Now, when it comes to the transmitting domain, it's what we call a zone of inner conflict. Okay, meaning there's a part of me that wants to transmit, but there's a part of me that doesn't. And there's a part of me that thinks it's distasteful almost, right? It's like, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to, and there's a part of them that's saying, I wish I had that lack of inhibition. But there's another part of them that finds that lack of inhibition um, threatening, scary, and abrasive. And she has this way of kind of being dismissive to Harry Zim, the Gene Hackman character, right, who's very much a transmitter, and the Danny DeVito character, Martin. I forget the character's full name, but there's this kind of disdain she has for them that really feels on the nose for me for how navigators tend to see people like that.
And they're presented as being kind of full of themselves.
Yes. Yes.
Like there's not much substance to them. They're all flash. They're easily impressed. They're very prone to flattery and kind of empty.
Yes. Yes. And this, it's interesting because I think one of the things that this movie shows is that, again, this, when it comes to transmitters, for them, the navigating domain is what we call the zone of indifference, okay, meaning that they just don't pay enough attention to it. They're not usually skillful at it. They think it's a negative thing because, number one, it's like, why are you talking about things that don't matter? There's all these exciting things that are happening. There's all these opportunities out there that we could be doing. But also the navigating domain has this inhibition to it, right? Around not wanting to put myself out there. And if you are a performer, or in the performing industry, the last thing you want to see in somebody else is inhibition, right? So what happens is that navigators tend not to be very good at, I'm sorry, transmitters tend to be not very good at navigating and end up getting into trouble when they navigate poorly. And this is the thing we see with all these characters who, come to, unfortunate ends throughout the movie. Right? Did you
And
see that theme or?
absolutely, because the through line of the movie is that Chili Palmer is able to play everybody like a symphony conductor.
Yeah.
Like he knows what's going on. And given that all the transmitting characters are very bad at navigating, and he's very good at it, it's almost like he's in a spelling bee with a bunch of children. I'm like, oh, you're so cute. Look at all of you trying to do this. You have
Right.
no idea what you're doing.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. He's kind of playing three-dimensional chess to their, checkers almost. Right? The other character that I thought was pretty navigating was the late great James Gandolfini, who played Bear, the stuntman slash bodyguard. Thoughts on that character?
Uh, I didn't recognize navigating in him. I didn't really think in those terms at all. Like, I'm curious where you see that. Wonderful performance, like
Yeah,
just a great performer.
yeah. So that character, again, so the character, he was a former stuntman, okay, who was now serving as a bodyguard to this two-bit criminal, Delroy Lindo. And you can see him, it's kind of a nine-ish character in a way as well, which I think Gandolfini was in real life. But so there's this kind of, you get this sense that I'm working with this guy because I need a job, right? I need to make money. My stuntman, career's over. I'm good at being big and intimidating and tough, but my heart is not in this kind of thing that you're doing. And one of the things I noticed about Gandolfini as I rewatched the movie is that he's observing everything that's going on and he's thinking about things that he's not talking about. Right. Almost every other character, except for the Rene Russo character and some of Chili Palmer, every thought they have is being externalized, right? Especially the Harry Zim, Gene Hackman character. I mean, there's not a thought that guy had that didn't come out of his mouth. Okay. And, but the Bear is, he's observing and he's paying attention. And it's him that comes up with the solution to the Delroy Lindo character, right? Because he's been observing and paying attention. And again, it's a very good Elmore Leonard-ish character in this situation. So in this movie, what we see is the navigating bias sort of triumphing, the more methodical, strategical navigating bias triumphing. Am I saying it? Boy, oh boy, it's been a long day. Triumphing over the more blundering, transmitting sort of characters, right?
And we see just how badly Gene Hackman's character blunders
Yeah.
in an early scene in which Chili Palmer is sitting behind his desk and says to,
Right,
Delroy
right,
Lindo and
right,
the other guy are going to
right.
come in and says, okay, don't tell them who I am.
Yeah, don't
I
say a
want them to
word.
see.
Yeah,
Yeah. And of course, Gene Hackman says immediately, this is who he is.
yeah.
And this is the script that I have, which he wasn't supposed to tell them about. He just can't not blurt it out. Whereas Chili is so much more strategic.
Right, right. Yeah. So let's talk for a moment about Elmer Leonard characters, okay, and the navigating bias, okay. And I think again we can do a separate video on that, but a few things stand out for me on this that are relevant to this movie. I find that most Elmore Leonard heroes are navigators. Okay, who are trying to figure out a set of circumstances. Let me ask you this, TJ. Have you read many Elmore Leonard books? Are you familiar with his work?
think about five. Yeah.
Okay. So it's almost always somebody who finds themselves in this odd situation with these characters that they're trying to figure out, and then, trying to figure out how to get through this situation in one piece, usually. Okay. And a number of his books early on were made into horrible, horrible movies. The most famous one was Stick with Burt Reynolds. It's just a great book, terrible, terrible movie. But later on, some of his movies were made into, some of his books were made into really good movies. And the ones that stand out for me are Jackie Brown, the Quentin Tarantino movie with Robert Forster and Pam Grier, and Out of Sight with George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez. Jennifer Lopez and George Clooney, certainly transmitters, right? But playing navigating characters in those movies. Okay. Same thing here, a transmitting John Travolta playing a navigating sort of character. And, Pam Grier, absolutely transmitting. Okay. I'm not so sure about Robert Forster. I don't remember him well enough, but playing navigating characters and at the heart of this. And so I think it's going to be interesting at some point for us to come back and talk a bit more about some of those movies and the navigating bias.
And I wouldn't be surprised. I know nothing about the man's actual life, but I wouldn't be surprised if Elmore Leonard is a navigating type,
Oh, I
and
think
that
so.
Get Shorty is an analogy for his experience in Hollywood, because, as you said, a lot of his novels have
Yes.
been adapted into movies. He
Yes.
doesn't live in Hollywood.
Right.
He's not a screenwriter himself, as far as I know. He's a novelist. That's what
Right.
he does.
Right.
He's very successful at it. Seemingly, that's what he likes to do. He's been named a grand master of crime
Yeah.
fiction.
Yeah.
And yet, I'm sure he has all kinds of interactions with flashy Hollywood types who then, as you described, take his novels and turn them into shitty movies.
Yes.
Sometimes good ones, but a lot of bad ones,
Yes.
because it's crime fiction. So
Yes.
you can make something really flashy out of that. And
Yeah.
I'm sure he's sat through many meetings where someone who's full of hot air and doesn't realize he's full of hot air is expanding on, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and then ends up stabbing you in the back and ends up not doing what they said they were going to do, and all of
Yeah.
that thing. So
Yeah.
Get Shorty is, I think, not only an analogy, but it's a satire
I
of
think it consciously
Hollywood.
was. Yeah, I think it deliberately was. Now, Leonard died about 10 years ago, but he was originally from Detroit and then spent a lot of time in Florida. So his books usually take place in either Detroit or Florida. And yeah, and you're absolutely right. His books had been being turned into films going back to the 60s and early 70s with Ombre, the Steve McQueen, not Steve McQueen, Paul Newman Western, and the great Mr. Majestic with Charles Bronson. I mean, just one of my, as a kid, one of my all-time favorite movies. A Navigating Eight, probably, maybe a Preserving Eight, but anyway, just a great, great kind of bad movie that I always enjoyed. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that Leonard was a navigator, probably a navigating five. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me of a very different temperament, but he kind of reminds me of Cormac McCarthy in a way, in his the sort of cerebral and analytical quality he has to observing and figuring out people. Now, McCarthy was much, much darker and harsher and all these sort of things, but for some reason they strike me as similar.
Uh, Another thing to bring up about Get Shorty, managing people.
Mm,
That's a big part of what Chile does very well,
mm,
is just understanding like how people work. The transmitting characters aren't so great at that because they're so self-focused. But something Chile says repeatedly is, look at me.
yeah.
And he also says, I'm the one who's telling you how it is.
Yes.
And when other characters try those lines, they don't work.
Right.
You would think that would be something a transmitter would say.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think, again, I think that we have one of these situations where a character is sort of a mishmash of type and instinctual bias going on here because of script, actor, director, whatever, adding different elements to it. So I think that there are times when if I was to really think about Chili Palmer as written, I'm thinking navigating 8, right? But Travolta is so transmitting and so probably 2ish that, again, it exudes this other sort of thing. So that's the kind of thing I can think of a navigating 8 saying, right? Of look at me. Okay, no, stop, look at me, sort of thing, right? So I think that's a situation where the dialogue might have worked a little bit better or felt more authentic and consistent with a different kind of actor playing the role, perhaps.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Another thing coming to mind is networking.
Mm.
It's a big part of navigating, which, and I say this as a transmitter, is a dirty word to a lot of transmitters because it feels phony or unnecessary. And from a transmitter's mindset is I shouldn't have to do that. I should be able to beam myself so brilliantly that people come to me and say, will you be in my movie? Will you write my movie? Will you have sex with me? Will you do whatever the thing that I'm intending to happen?
Yeah.
As opposed to networking, which is like, who am I connected to? And I actually had my whole understanding of networking change when somebody said, think of it as having genuine connections in conversations. Find common ground. Talk about things you're both really interested rather than I want something from you.
Yes. Yeah, so the way I describe that, because this is something that comes up in my work a lot. So what I find is that now I think you're bringing a transmitting 4 perspective to the topic, okay, for one thing, right? A lot of transmitters are really good at transactional networking. Okay, I need to know that person. I'm going to go up and introduce myself, and I'm going to get in front of that person. Okay, so it's like a Harry Zim, right? Harry Zim is like, I'll talk to anybody, I don't care. You might be able to have funding for me and so forth. So I'll go make it. But it tends to be transactional networking in that situation. Whereas with navigators, what they do is they tend to do, I'll call it delayed transaction networking, right? All networking is transactional, ultimately. But what navigators are good at is I want to know everybody that's in this room at least a little bit so that I've got resources to go back to when I need them, right? And I'm going to keep my finger on the pulse of these people, and I'm going to keep up with what they're doing, and I'm going to, maintain relationships so it's there when I need it. Okay, so navigators are great networkers in the sense of spotting people out of the crowd who might, they're good at kind of like the sports scouts who go out and watch high school games and do all these things and spot talent, whereas the transmitting approach is going to be more like, hey, that guy was an all-star last year, I'm going to go talk to him, right? So that's the distinction I see. And I think Chili Palmer is better in the movie at the delayed transaction networking, whereas a Harry Zim is, hey, you might be able to put money in my pocket right now, but once I decide that you're not, you don't exist to me anymore.
And the ending of the movie has Chili as a successful film producer.
Yes.
He's able to parlay these abilities into a genuine career in an incredibly competitive industry.
Yes. And producing is the ultimate in navigating in movie making, right? Because I have to keep an eye on all the pieces. I have to know who all the players are. I have to know where all the resources are. I have to see the big picture. I have to cajole this person. I have to threaten that person. I have to seduce this person, right? Whatever I have to do. But I've got, but I really can't define what my job is, right? And that's kind of one of the jokes about being a producer. What do they do? Well, I really don't know, right? But, you know, but there is a job there. There is an art to it. It's just very unclear.
They're organizers more
Yes.
than anything else.
Yes.
And in addition to all the things you named, they have to liaise with the money people.
Yes.
So those are quite often, Harvard business grads
Yes.
who aren't artists and don't even aspire to be, although maybe in their own minds. But like they're the ones in charge of dispensing millions and millions of dollars, and you've got to speak their language. So it is very much like you have to be multilingual in that way of like, how do I speak to a business person? How do I speak to a movie star?
Yes.
How do I speak to a crew member? How do I speak to a distributor?
Yes.
All of that. How do I speak to the media?
Yes, very much a kind of a chameleon-ish sort of character, right? Who do I need to be in this situation? How do I need to speak this person's language? And you're right, that's what navigating's very much about. Okay. All right. So I encourage people, if you have not seen Get Shorty, again, it's a little bit of an old movie, but I think it holds up really, really well. I think it's a delightful movie, well written, wonderfully acted, fun, fast moving. Um, Go watch it, and it'll help you understand what navigating is all about. Yeah.
And even if you just take it at face value, it's an entertaining 2 hours.
Yeah.
Even if you're not thinking the Enneagram at all, it's just fun to watch.
Yeah. Good. All right. Thanks, TJ.
Thank you, Mario.
Oops.